In the chilly embrace of twilight, as the last vestiges of daylight surrendered to the cold grip of night, the villagers of Ashton Keynes nestled deeper into their homes, seeking solace from the unforgiving winter. The quaint cottages, huddled together like weary travelers, offered scant protection from the howling winds that carried whispers of a harsh season ahead. Her dreams, as elusive as smoke, drifted away like morning mist, leaving her anchored to the stark reality of her circumstances. With the dawn, she knew her father, a man whose hands bore silent witness to years of toil, would rouse early to brave the elements. Tall and imposing, his beard flowed like a frozen waterfall, each strand a filament of winter's icy breath. Old Man Winter raised a warning finger, his icy gaze boring into them. There was a flicker of recognition in his glacial eyes, as if a fragment of memory stirred within his ancient soul. Finally he spoke, his voice a rumble that echoed the distant sound of glaciers grinding against eternity. The girl who had unwittingly danced with destiny, little did they know that their peaceful existence was hanging by a thread. The fragile balance between their world and the icy clutches of Old Man Winter had been disrupted, and the consequences threatened to be as chilling as the heart of winter itself. With Alaric taken, who had stepped forward to safeguard the remaining villagers from the icy clutches of the winter giant? Would they be able to withstand the coming onslaught when Old Man Winter inevitably returned to claim his due? Or would fear and division tear them apart, leaving each family to fend for itself against the icy wrath of the unforgiving winter? Only time would tell, as the chilling saga of the winter giant and the village of Ashdown Keynes entered its most perilous chapter yet. "Very well," boomed the giant, his voice resonating with the finality of a winter's decree. "You have held to the old ways, villagers of Ashdown Keynes. For that I shall honor our bargain." With a gesture that was almost regal in its bearing, Old Man Winter returned the child to his anxious parents. The villagers erupted in relieved murmurs, their voices rising in gratitude as they thanked the spirit of winter for his adherence to tradition. But as the celebrations of their small victory commenced, a figure remained rooted to the spot. It was Alara, and she watched her brother run into her mother's welcoming arms with a profound sense of foreboding. The disturbing truth dawned on her. She was the youngest of the family, the one who had managed to avoid Old Man Winter's notice in all these years. Until now, her safety had been secured by the elder sibling standing between her and the winter giant. But with Alaric gone, the protective shield that had shielded her from the harsh realities of their world had crumbled, leaving her exposed and alone. Her heart sank as she realized that her own name echoed the prophecy spoken by the winter giant. The realization shook her to her core, forcing her to confront the unsettling premonition that had haunted her dreams. Could it be that her destiny was intertwined with the capricious whims of the ruthless Old Man Winter? Or was this merely a cruel twist of fate, a tragic accident that had befallen her unsuspecting village? Fear coiled in her stomach, threatening to consume her whole. But beneath the terror, a spark of defiance ignited in her eyes. Whatever fate awaited her, she would face it head-on, drawing strength from the love of her family and the unwavering spirit of her village. The villagers held their breath, acutely aware that the fate of their village hung in the balance. But as the standoff continued, a subtle change began to creep into the atmosphere. The wind, which had been keening mournfully, softened its tune. The snow, which had swirled in frenzied patterns, seemed to dance with newfound grace. And the very air, which had been thick with tension, cleared, allowing the faintest glimmer of hope to peek through the cracks of despair. It was a challenge, a test of their resolve, and the stakes were painfully clear. Whoever stepped forward to confront the giant risked losing their child to the eternal winter. The villagers shifted uneasily, their gazes darting between the menacing giant and the terrified child. A pregnant silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the mournful cry of a distant owl. But Alara's mother, her face a mask of grim determination, wasted no time in deciphering the chilling riddle presented by Old Man Winter. Without a word, she stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the giant, her hand outstretched towards her son. She didn't falter, didn't plead. She simply confronted the embodiment of winter, challenging him with a quiet dignity that sent shivers down the spines of the onlookers. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of conviction as she called upon the ancient pact that bound her village to the spirit of winter. She reminded Old Man Winter of the bargain they had struck, a pact that allowed him to claim one child each year in exchange for sparing the rest of the village from his harshest wrath. His eyes, twin pools of glacial blue, seemed to pierce the very core of the villagers' souls, judging, assessing, and in some cases, selecting. The villagers, their faces a tableau of apprehension, stood firm, their voices raised in unison as they sang ancient songs, their melody a shield against the encroaching chill. But as Old Man Winter approached, his presence grew more ominous, the wind rising to a menacing crescendo, whipping snow into frenzied dances and rattling windows with icy fingers. A hush fell over the crowd as the frosted giant reached out, his gnarled hand disappearing into the depths of a nearby cottage. Then, to the villagers' mounting horror, he emerged carrying a child, little Alaric, his face ashen, his eyes vacant, his small form trembling like a leaf in a tempest. His weathered face, etched with the passage of time, would disappear into the gray expanse, seeking respite in the company of fellow men who shared his fate. Alaric, her brother, already awake, sat by the hearth, his youthful eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Though his small frame trembled slightly in the face of the encroaching cold, his spirit remained unbroken. Their mother, Alara's heart ached for her children, rose wearily, and began the daily ritual of coaxing life into their dying fire. Her gaze, as deep and fathomless as the winter sky, held a quiet strength that spoke of battles fought and won against the unrelenting grip of poverty. Theirs was a tale woven from the threads of countless lives touched by the unyielding hand of fate, a testament to the indomitable spirit that thrived even in the bleakest of winters. For in this idyllic English countryside, the tranquility of a winter's night was often shattered by the rattle of skeletal branches, clawing at window panes and the mournful howl of the wind weaving tales of icy woes. Inside one such humble abode, a young woman named Ilara stirred from her slumber. Yet tonight, as the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the frost-kissed ground, a change stirred in the village. Tonight, the boundaries between the mundane and the mystical blurred, giving birth to a chilling spectacle that would etch itself into the annals of Ashton Keynes's folklore. The townspeople, heeding the call of an ancient tradition, prepared for the arrival of Old Man Winter. Each household transformed into a battleground, barricading doors against the mythical visitor and readying themselves for the icy onslaught that accompanied his legendary visit. Windows were sealed against the penetrating stare of the frosty giant, while hearths blazed fiercely, offering feeble resistance to the cold that threatened to seep into their very bones. Their offerings were modest yet potent, symbolic gestures designed to ward off the spirit of winter's wrath. Apples bobbed in cauldrons, their sweet fragrance mingling with the pungent scent of burning wood. Yule logs crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls as if engaged in a playful duel with the encroaching darkness. The children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement, pressed close to their parents, their small hands seeking the comforting warmth of their loved one's embrace. Their innocent faces reflected the flickering candlelight, momentarily chasing away the creeping gloom that threatened to engulf their spirits. And then he came, stepping out of the swirling snow, a figure both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Alara, her heart pounding against her ribs, watched in petrified fascination as the villagers recoiled in unison. As the mother stepped closer, the giant's expression seemed to shift ever so slightly. Old Man Winter, his gaze unwavering, regarded the mother and her son, the embodiment of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. As the villagers of Ashdown-Cairns reveled in their momentary victory over the winter giant, unaware of the looming shadow that had fallen upon Alara. The temperature is dropping outside. You pull your sweater tighter and sip your hot chocolate, grateful for the warmth enveloping you. But as you shiver, imagine you are in medieval Europe in the middle of winter. Let's gather around the fireplace and explore what life was really like for ordinary people in Europe during the heart of winter. What hardships did they face? How did they cope? And what can their story teach us about ourselves and our relationship with the natural world? No central heating, fireplaces that barely keep a room warm, and food supplies dwindling after the harvest festival. Days were shorter, with sunrise after 6 a.m. and sunset before 4 p.m., limiting working hours. Candles and oil lamps provided dim lighting for evening activities. The lack of daylight, combined with cloudy, rainy days, contributed to seasonal affective disorder. People coped by spending more time indoors, socializing, and sharing stories. Messages were delivered by runners or sent via mounted riders. Rural dwellers relied on animal-powered transport like ox carts and sledges. Mail coaches were available for longer distances, but services were inconsistent. First, appreciate the progress we've made in combating the challenges of winter. As we reflect on the experiences of ordinary people in medieval Europe during this time, we gain a deeper appreciation for their resilience and adaptability. Despite the harsh conditions, they found ways to celebrate, create, and persevere. Their stories remind us of the importance of community, faith, and the indomitable human spirit in the face of adversity. Moreover, their struggles highlight the need for compassion and support for those facing hardship in our own time. By learning from the past and embracing these lessons, we can build a brighter future where we are better prepared to weather the storms of life and support one another through challenging times. Modern technology and infrastructure allow us to regulate temperature, store food, and travel more easily. Yet despite these advancements, it's essential to recognize that winter's hardships still impact many today. Extreme weather events, food insecurity, and limited access to healthcare and resources affect countless people worldwide. We must acknowledge these realities and work toward creating a more equitable and sustainable future. Second, reflect on the human spirit's strength and resilience in the face of adversity. During medieval winters, people found ways to celebrate, create, and persevere through unimaginable hardships. Their stories remind us that we have an inner strength to endure and adapt to whatever challenges we may face. Finally, as we enjoy the comforts of our modern lives, let's extend compassion and support to those less fortunate. Whether it's donating to a local food bank, volunteering at a shelter, or simply lending a helping hand to a neighbor, we can make a difference in someone's life during challenging times. By embracing these lessons, we honor the legacy of those who came before us while creating a better future for ourselves and generations to come. The lack of reliable transportation posed significant obstacles for merchants, travelers, and rulers alike. Religious observances and festivals provided spiritual comfort and communal support. Craftsmen produced items tailored to the season, like warm clothing and blankets. Entertainment options included storytelling, gambling, and music. Theaters and dance halls provided diversions for the wealthy. Festivals and fairs offered a break from the routine, but extreme weather could disrupt events. People also engaged in sports like wrestling, swimming, and football, though games were adapted for winter conditions. Hunting was popular among nobles, while falconry provided sport and meat for consumption. Winter means bare branches scraping against windows, icy winds whistling through cracks in the walls, and the haunting crunch of footsteps on frost-covered streets. Valiantly facing the elements, noble knights and daring adventurers roamed the frozen wastes, battling not only the biting cold, but also fearsome beasts. Stories of valiant huntsmen braving the wintry wilds to bring down mighty game echoed around roaring hearths, each successful kill providing sustenance and glory. Tales of cunning rogues and wily outlaws surviving on their wits as they sought shelter from the unforgiving freeze. And who can forget the legendary battles waged across frozen fields and snow-covered mountains, where victory meant life and defeat meant a slow and agonizing death. These stories of courage, survival, and resilience served as inspiration to those trapped indoors, reminding them that even in the darkest depths of winter, the spirit of humanity could triumph over the harshest conditions. Children played indoor games like chess and cards, or went sledding and skating when weather permitted. However, they primarily assisted adults with chores. Education focused on religious instruction, with wealthy children attending private schools or traveling abroad for classical studies. Christianity provided solace, and rituals helped people endure the darkness and cold. Churches hosted religious plays and festivals, fostering community. Carols celebrated the season, while the promise of spring's return offered hope. Birthdays, weddings, and funerals continued during winter, though inclement weather sometimes delayed or disrupted them. Marriage proposals were common during the Yule season, believing warmer summer love would result. Funerals were solemn affairs, with burials occurring at consecrated sites. Corpses were often displayed publicly prior to burial. Meanwhile, guilds provided vocational training for aspiring artisans. It's a time of quiet desperation. Treatments focused on balancing the four humors and relied on bloodletting, herbal remedies, and rest. Hospitals primarily cared for the poor and pilgrims, often lacking adequate supplies and staffing. Surgery was risky without anesthesia or antiseptics. Women relied on midwives for deliveries, though skilled physicians could attend births. Public health measures were limited, with waste disposal posing a sanitation challenge. Cures were often worse than the disease itself. People suffered from rickets due to vitamin D deficiency caused by limited sunlight. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant concerns, especially for outdoor workers. But you don't have to suffer through a medieval winter alone. First, we need to talk about the cold. Medieval Europe experienced harsh continental climates with freezing temperatures and heavy snowfall. Unpredictable weather patterns meant one village might have a mild winter while another faced blizzards. Unlike today, there were no heaters or insulated homes. People huddled around fireplaces for warmth, often sleeping by the fire to retain body heat. Peasants relied on peat fires, animal dung, or wood waste for cooking and warmth, while wealthier folks had brick chimneys and stoves. But everyone struggled with drafts seeping through cracks in stone and timber houses. Windows were small and made of thin glass or oiled paper, offering little insulation. To make matters worse, the sun's warmth didn't penetrate winter clouds and fog, leading to gray, gloomy days. People dressed in layers, including woolen tunics, hose, and thick belts to keep warm. Hoods and veils offered some protection from the elements. Leather boots kept feet dry, though snow could still seep in. Some used hot water bottles filled with herbs to soothe aching joints and muscles. Food availability and scarcity also impacted daily life. Winter harvests were essential for survival. Stored grain, root vegetables, and dried fruits supplemented diets. Meat preservation techniques like salting and smoking allowed people to consume meats year-round. However, spoilage and shortages were common. Milk became scarce as cows produced less during colder months. Cheese and butter took on greater importance. Foraging for wild foods like berries and nuts supplemented meals, but success depended on the weather. Famine and starvation remained constant threats, especially for peasants dependent on a single crop. In addition to physical hardships, limited daylight hours affected work schedules and people's moods. Now, let's look at some aspects of daily life. Healthcare during medieval winter was rudimentary. Wintertime faith and spirituality played a significant role in coping with the harsh season. Communication and transportation faced challenges during winter. Travel was difficult with impassable roads and frozen waterways, hindering trade and communication. But throughout these challenges, life still went on. Shops and businesses operated on modified hours. Markets offered seasonal goods and services. Now let's hear some stories. Tales of bravery, survival, and hardship. As we conclude our exploration of medieval life in winter, consider the lessons we can apply to our own lives. In the tapestry of life, winter holds a unique place as a season of challenges and introspection. As we snuggle gratefully into our warm beds, let us spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded into memory, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. The icy grip of winter poverty was relentless and pitiless. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment took on the unmistakable stamp of the season. Indoor games and sports flourished, providing welcome distractions from the harsh realities of the season. The crunch of snow underfoot and the gleeful shouts of children echoed across the frozen ponds and hillsides. For adults, the season's bounty offered unique opportunities. Hunting game, thick fur-clad men pursued rabbits and hares through the snow, their dogs barking encouragement. Trapping was another pursuit, with snares set to catch unwary animals venturing too close. This frozen tableau played out across the countryside, a testament to humanity's enduring resourcefulness in the face of winter's challenges. Winter's chill did not deter all forms of recreation, but it did shape them in interesting ways. Wrestling matches and combat sports moved indoors, filling tap rooms and stables with the sounds of grunting and crashing bodies. Contests of strength and endurance were popular, with feats like lifting heavy stones or carrying heavy loads on one's back drawing crowds of onlookers. Though the landscape was frozen and barren, the human spirit found ways to thrive. At the higher echelons of society, jousting and falconry were popular diversions. For the destitute, winter was a time of dire straits, forcing desperate measures and highlighting the stark realities of destitution. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. With resources dwindling and the bitter cold seeping into bones, beggars and vagrants were driven to extreme lengths to survive. They might seek shelter in the warm chimneys of large buildings or huddle in haystacks, sharing scant rations and body heat. Some resorted to sleeping rough in the open, wrapping themselves in rags and whatever spare clothing they possessed. Sadly, many children found themselves in these desperate situations, abandoned or orphaned, left to fend for themselves in the unforgiving winter landscape. Archery contests pitting lord against vassal were staples of medieval tournaments held in great halls. These competitions tested skill, nerve, and strength, offering a thrilling spectacle for spectators. For humbler folk, games involving skill and chance offered a bit of excitement. Chess, checkers, and backgammon were enjoyed by those seeking mental stimulation. Dice games and card playing provided simple amusement, though they could also lead to heated arguments and occasional fistfights. Winter's darkness also lent itself to literary pursuits. Storytelling and poetry readings were favored pastimes, keeping the spirits up with tales of valor, romance, and mirth. Minstrels and traveling entertainers regaled audiences with songs of legendary heroes and whimsical jests. Some tales were cautionary, others uproariously funny, but all served to lighten the mood during the bleak winter nights. The sheer drudgery of scratching out an existence in the bitter cold colored all aspects of life. But how did the powerful and influential aristocrats spend their winters? The answer is strikingly similar to how the rest of society endured the season, albeit with greater comfort. The grand manors of the nobility provided insulation from the worst of the winter weather, along with ample supplies of fuel and food. While peasants might shiver around meager hearths, aristocratic halls boasted roaring fires to warm the blood and spirits alike. Festive decorations transformed these great houses into seasonal sanctuaries. Evergreens brought in from the gardens and forests, adorned with flowers, fruits, and even gold leaf, added splashes of color against the dark wood. Garlands wreathed around doorways and entwined with banners bearing family crests. For the highest rungs of society, life in winter was insulated and entertaining. Lordly banquets echoed with music and merriment, while pages and servants hustled to serve their betters. Board games, hunting parties, and indoor sports kept nobles active and amused. And when the chill winds howled outside, lords and ladies were content to stay indoors where roaring fires burned and flagons flowed. Firewood was a precious commodity, with strict laws governing the gathering of fallen timbers from forests. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, striving to eke out some feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared what heat there was, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meager subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest bounty was a distant memory, and the first shy greenery of spring was still months away. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter made for some very dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and, if lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavor tasteless and tedious, but enough to keep body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh in their hunger. Parents were said to have smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered the streets and fields, too numerous for proper burial. Although this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, localized crop failures and food shortages were an ever-present menace. A medieval winter diet walked a tightrope between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down, with the knowledge that things would likely get worse before they got better. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights were the hallmarks of the season. The fortunate retreated to the meager warmth of smoky hovels and drafty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest winter hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, disease could spread like wildfire. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and bleary-eyed, but far more serious illnesses also stalked the populace. Influenza was a fearsome foe, striking down young and old alike with its telltale fever, chills, and aches. In an age without vaccines or effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza raging across Europe. In Paris alone, over 10,000 souls perished. Pneumonia was another stealthy killer, preying on those weakened by hunger or other illnesses. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It was not unusual for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving orphan children and shattered lives in its wake. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, Disease often spread even more rapidly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife, Jane Seymour, to postnatal complications, likely exacerbated by the poor hygienic practices of the age. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly dangerous time for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced an especially precarious start to life. In London in the 1500s, fully half of all children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. One poignant practice of the age speaks volumes. The custom of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a seriously ill infant. Should the child pass away, this ribbon could then be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter, a steadily toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside the home and within, winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those of limited means, even the basic comforts of shelter, food, and warmth could not be taken for granted. Beyond basic survival, winter affected every facet of medieval culture. While the bleak winter days cast a pall over daily life, certain pastimes offered solace and diversion. The winter landscape itself provided inspiration for some pastimes. Sledding, skating, and snowball fights were favorite diversions for children and young people. And yet for many, even the prospect of indoor games and hearty meals failed to lift the crushing weight of poverty. So what do you think? How does life in the winter affect you? Did you know about these medieval traditions? Winter in the Middle Ages was a harsh mistress, and in today's video, I am going to show you that you did not want to be caught outside without shelter when the skies turn dark and the temperature plummets. Days were short, dark, and bitterly cold. Life within the four walls of a home was far from idyllic. For the young, snuggled up against their parents' skirts, these evenings were pure magic, their imaginations warming to the tales spun before them. For adults, the tales were a welcome distraction from the worries of daily life, a brief respite from the burdens of their station. The hearth became a portal to worlds beyond their own, melting away the winter blues, at least for a few precious hours each night. A fresh snowfall transformed the mundane into something almost ethereal. A neighbor sharing meager rations, a stranger offering a helping hand, a smile exchanged across the cold expanse of a marketplace. These were the threads that wove a tapestry of resilience. The celebration of Christmas Day, with its nativity scenes, carols, and festive feasting, symbolized hope and the promise of renewal. The birth of Jesus, conceived as the bringer of light, served as a potent reminder that even in the depths of winter's darkness, snow-laden branches formed intricate patterns against the leaden sky, while frost painted delicate designs on window panes. Nature, it seemed, was putting on a final spectacular show before retreating into dormancy. Until then, take care and stay warm. And those who paused to appreciate the ephemeral art on display found moments of tranquility amidst the cold. Sleigh rides across frozen lakes, skating on ponds, and sledding down hillsides offered moments of innocent joy, particularly for children. The carefree laughter of youngsters echoed across the snow-covered landscape, momentarily chasing away the gloom. For adults, there was the simple pleasure of watching the young at play, finding vicarious delight in their abandon. There was a dawning of warmth and joy to look forward to. Religious services, with their stirring sermons and hymns of praise, provided not only spiritual comfort, but also a sense of shared purpose. Within the hallowed confines of a church, people came together, united in their faith, finding strength in numbers. Amidst the struggle for individual survival, community bonds were forged, reinforced by the simple recognition that together they could better withstand the rigors of winter's embrace. From the solemn ringing of church bells to the glow of candlelight illuminating fervent prayers, religion provided a steady beacon, guiding them through the bleakest days. Prayer became a lifeline, carrying their hopes and fears heavenward, and the responses they received, be they in dreams, whispers of the wind, or the flicker of a flame, were seen as messages of support and perseverance. Meadows and rooftops donned pristine white robes, while the delicate tracery of frost on window panes became canvases for nature's artistry. Children, their cheeks flushed with the cold, their eyes sparkling with mischief, reveled in the novelty of winter's bounty, building snowmen, having snowball fights, and making snow angels in the soft drifts. The worst of winter seemed to be behind them, but there was a long way yet to go. Still, with each sunrise, hope flickered anew. The days, though short, held possibilities for connection, creativity, and kindness. Life, tenacious and resilient, pressed on, determined to defy the stark grip of winter's unrelenting reign. And as the first tentative signs of spring began to appear, however faintly, there was a collective sigh of relief, a silent acknowledgement that winter's dominion was slowly but surely waning. In the face of adversity, the medieval people had proven their mettle. They had weathered the storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged with their spirits intact, ready to greet whatever challenges and triumphs the coming months might bring. In their laughter and abandon, there was a reminder that even in the harshest of conditions, life, like a tenacious weed, found a way to bloom. But as the sun's pale light faded earlier and earlier, the true dangers of winter began to emerge. The dwindling daylight hours coincided with the proliferation of crime and lawlessness. Desperate measures were taken to survive the lean months, and tempers flared easily in the close confines of dimly lit homes. Suddenly, the icy streets took on a darker cast, a lurking menace that chilled the blood more than the biting wind. Petty thefts escalated into violent assaults. The rumble of drunken brawls echoed in the night, and the flash of a knife under the cloak of darkness sent shivers down even the most jaded traveler's spine. The medieval justice system, already creaky and underfunded, was ill-equipped to deal with this surge in lawlessness. Law enforcement officers, often ill-fed and ill-trained, were reluctant to brave the perilous winter nights to answer distress calls. And even if they did, the trials and imprisonments that followed were likely to be delayed until warmer weather. For in a time when jury duty was unpaid and judges were frequently absent from their posts, justice was often slow to be served. In the meantime, the accused were left languishing in overcrowded dank cells, their fates hanging in the balance. For one thing, housing in the Middle Ages, whether a rustic cottage or a grand manor house, was typically poorly insulated by modern standards. Grand halls might have boasted roaring fires fed by ample stores of wood, and lords and ladies might have feasted sumptuously. Outside, the landscape itself bore the brunt of winter's merciless assault. Fields and forests, once basking in the warmth of summer's embrace, stood stark and desolate, stripped bare by the wind, beaten by rain, and frosted by relentless night. The rich tapestry of green was replaced by a monochrome palette of grays and whites, broken only by the occasional splash of color from a defiant berry or the plumage of a hardy songbird. The very trees seemed to shiver and strain against the weight of the snow and ice, their naked branches reaching skyward like supplicating arms. In this transformed world, movement was often fraught with peril. Every step had to be carefully considered. Farmers, their faces creased with years of toil and wind exposure, tested the thickness of the ice on ponds and frozen streams, ever mindful of the sudden crack that could send them plunging into frigid waters. Merchants, laden with wares and watchful of their footing, navigated slippery streets, their steps echoing eerily in the deserted thoroughfares. Lovers, their breath forming white puffs in the frigid air, stole shy glances and hurried steps. hoping to steal a moment of intimacy before winter's darkness claimed the daylight hours. Yet even in the height of luxury, winter's specter loomed large. Elaborate tapestries had to be carefully unrolled to insulate against the cold, while servants scurried about ensuring that curtains were drawn tight against the evening chill. Even in the midst of plenty, there was an underlying awareness of winter's relentless passage. Each hour of daylight was precious, and so the upper echelons of medieval society sought to make the most of it, hosting lavish feasts and tournaments to celebrate everything from saintly days to royal christenings. These events, unfolding against the backdrop of winter's stark landscapes, were infused with an almost manic gaiety. Music swelled, laughter boomed, and tankards overflowed as nobles and courtiers reveled in the temporary triumph of merriment over the encroaching gloom of winter's night. But even as they feasted, they knew that winter's relentless march continued, that even in the midst of their revelry, the days grew shorter and the nights colder still. Drafty windows rattled in their frames, letting in icy drafts that mingled with the damp seeping through crumbling stone walls. The absence of central heating meant that residents were entirely dependent on a single hearth, fire to stave off the worst of the cold. For many, this meant sleeping in close proximity to their animal companions, sharing the scant body heat they could generate. While for some, a roaring fire might have been the norm, for others, a meager, sputtering flame was all that they could afford. Still, around this flickering hearth, family and community bonds were forged and strengthened as people gathered to share stories, jokes, and songs, their voices weaving a warm tapestry that transcended the biting chill outside. The wind, whistling through bare branches, sang mournful dirges that chilled the very marrow in one's bones. And with sunset came a precipitous plunge into freezing temperatures that made venturing out a perilous gamble. No wonder then that people hunkered down in their homes, seeking refuge from the icy grip of winter. How did people cope? What dangers lurked in the winter snows? And what role did religion play in sustaining people through the coldest months? Welcome to my channel, and today let us really get cozy as we travel back in time to explore how medieval people coped with the perils and hardships of winter. It was a time when the sun's pale rays struggled to penetrate the thick, swirling mist that hung heavy over the land. But while the muffled crackle of a hearth fire and the comforting scent of wood smoke mingled with the aroma of roasting meats could bring a measure of solace to the hearth, as the firelight flickered and danced, casting long dancing shadows on the rough stone walls, tales of bravery, love, and adventure unfolded, carrying all present away to realms where winter's icy fingers had no hold. In the loftiest reaches of medieval society, the situation was somewhat different, but hardly less fraught with challenges. Alas, while the hearth might have provided a temporary sanctuary and stories shared around it could weave comforting spells, the trials of winter went far beyond the confines of home and hearth. Even amidst these struggles, though, beauty could be found. And yet, even in the darkest, most desperate moments of winter, humanity found a way to persevere. Small acts of kindness cut through the enveloping gloom. For Christians, the promise of Christ's birth during this season also offered solace. As the long nights of winter deepened and the days waned, people turned to the rituals of their faith to help them endure. And yet, despite the hardships and dangers, there was beauty to be found in winter. As February wore on, a sense of weary resignation settled over the land. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know in the comments what your favorite winter pastime is, and don't forget to check out the links below. As the most violent blizzards and bitterest frosts continued to torment the land, something almost supernatural happened. Dame Gretel, an old woman revered as a wise midwife, was summoned. The countess lay abed, feverish and delirious. Finally, at long last, the skies began to relent of their fury. and may your cup ever overflow with the sweet fermented fruits of the bountiful earth. That being said, our deepest sympathies are with those of you living in places where the searing heat refuses to quit. Sending you virtual jugs of cooling ale and tankards of ice mead to help you bear the dog days of August. May your burdens be light and your days merry. Until next time, farewell. The icy fingers of winter finally loosened their death grip on the land. Now, as if waking from a nightmare, the world bustled back into being. Birdsong, the soughing of leaves in the wind, and the comforting drone of bees re-emerged after long silences. Acorns dropped from trees in soft carpetings. The air buzzed with the excited chirping of returning swallows swooping over hedgerows. The brown earth drank deeply of meltwater, swelling with new life. From outcroppings, crocus and snowdrop poked their first fragile blossoms, nodding shyly as if afraid to tempt fate. Yet fate had clearly relented. Day by day, the pale winter sun climbed higher and sent warmer shafts into the reviving world. Swollen buds on branches unfurled into emerald green, tracing tentative patterns of new growth. The breath of the world quickened, rising up from slumber in a joyous hymn of hallelujah. Spring had sprung. At last the lean winter months were over. No longer did anxious adults hurry children indoors, lest their rosy cheeks be chilled by the wind. Bare arms and necks were tucked safely beneath woolen sleeves, and the sight of frost-nipped fingers and noses slowly faded from view. The grinding hunger that had driven some to gnawing on dried rat's meat or eating snow to dull their empty stomachs was gone. Gone, too, was the rattling cough of consumption and the sight of emaciated corpses wrapped hastily in grave cloths and hurried underground. Laughter echoed through villages once more. Children shrieked with delight as they chased one another around fountains, splashing at one another with squeals of mock outrage. The jangle of handbells signaled the return of street vendors hawking wares. Once more, sweet gingerbread men dangled from trays, and the smell of roasting chestnuts warmed the air. Patrons eagerly reached for the first plump strawberries ripening in market stalls, their juices staining fingers and lips a delectable crimson. Maples rose proudly in village greens, garlanded with flowers and set to spin and sway at the upcoming midsummer celebrations. Feasting halls were decked with greenery once more. Noble lords toasted to health and good cheer, though perhaps with more ale than was strictly prudent. From mountain tops to lowlands, riverbanks to frozen bogs, the reborn world throbbed with renewed vigor. Every leaf and blade of grass soaked up the returning sunlight, hurtling toward the abundant bounty of summer. Wild animals shaking free of winter torpor romped and gamboled. In glades, deer raised their heads to sniff the sweet air, while foxes abandoned their dens, tails aloft. New lambs frolicked in meadows, their bleating answered by the chatter of newborn chicks darting among the cornstalks. Barn doors were flung open wide, admitting the warm breezes and drying the precious grain harvest with speed. Even domesticated beasts basked in the sun's favor. Strong oxen pulling heavy plows rested their horns against the headland, catching their breaths, their sides slick with sweat. Everywhere, life surged forth, erupting into joyful existence. The song of the lark floated on the breeze, endlessly repeated, endlessly varied, endlessly beautiful. Winter was done. Spring had triumphed. Now summer beckoned with open arms, promising bountiful joys to all. Her husband, Sir Reginald, paced frantically while Dame Gretel prepared a poultice of fragrant herbs and spices to ease his wife's burning lungs. All the usual remedies seemed useless against this mysterious wasting sickness. The Countess grew weaker and weaker. Reginald's pleas to God became more desperate. Then Dame Gretel declared she had a radical idea. They would expose the Countess to the freezing night air, bundling her up in layers and layers of woolens to keep her alive. The whole court stared aghast. Surely that would kill her for sure, but Dame Gretel was adamant. She herself stood guard over the Countess through the blizzard, huddling close to shield her from the wind. When dawn broke, the court crowded around the bed, fearing the worst. But the Countess had survived, drenched in sweat, but breathing easier. Within days, the fever lifted. To everyone's astonishment, the child within her also seemed fine. Reginald and the entire court were beside themselves with gratitude towards the old midwife. What manner of witchcraft was this? They cried. She simply smiled cryptically and made the sign of the cross. She understood the healing power of ice water, a practice rooted in paganism, but sanctioned by the church as a godly cure. She used it sparingly, reserving this treatment only for the most dire cases. In time, word spread throughout the realm of the miraculous recoveries wrought by Dame Gretel. Farmers and field hands, nobles and paupers alike, braved the winter snows to seek her aid. Even priests and friars came asking her to save dying parishioners. Not all could be saved, but Dame Gretel stubbornly persisted, battling alongside doctors and clergy, committed to doing God's work however she could. And so it went, day after relentless day, week after unforgiving week. So let us raise our glasses, friends, to the return of the light, the glorious gift of the sun's embrace. The wind screeches through bare branches, swirling snow into frenzied eddies around crumbling stone cottages. A biting cold seeps through cloak and gambeson, chilling a knight to the bone despite his thick armor. Here, winter has descended in earnest, blanketing the land in a cold grip that shows no quarter. For medieval Europeans, winter was a harsh mistress, demanding respect and offering little warmth in return. Each year, as the days shorten and temperatures plunge, they knew a season of hardship and peril lay ahead. The sun's feeble rays yielded paltry heat, making fires essential for survival. But gathering fuel proved a back-breaking task, forcing families to venture into the teeth of winter storms. One by one, peasants dragged frozen logs home, their breath misting in the frosty air as they toiled to keep hearth fires burning through the long nights. The work was ceaseless, the cold implacable. In such conditions, hope flickered like a candle flame in the wind. But still, medieval people persevered, finding ways to mark the passing weeks and eke out an existence in the face of winter's relentless chill. They understood that though darkness and cold held sway for now, spring's return was inevitable, and with it, renewal and rebirth. Their survival instincts honed over generations, medieval Europeans were well equipped, or at least as prepared as one could be for the trials ahead. By mid-November, farmers had already completed the grim task of slaughtering and preserving their pigs, sheep, and cattle. Now, they used every scrap of hide and fat to ensure the coming lean months. Salt pork, salted and dried fish, along with stockpiled grain, formed the backbone of their rations. Cabbages and other hardy vegetables stored in root cellars provided crucial nutrients. Families carefully measured out their supplies, stretching them to last as long as possible. Every morsel counted. The prospect of spring seemed a distant dream. The nights were long, cold, and dark, a haunting silence broken only by wind and driving rain or the muffled crunch of fresh fallen snow. Long before Christmas, people had donned their warmest clothes and settled in for the worst. Women donned heavy woolen gowns and woolen or leather cloaks. Men wrapped themselves in thick mantles and tucked their heads into hooded cowls. Wealthier folk sometimes added luxurious furs, trapping the heat with ermine, fox, or sable linings. All sought shelter in sturdy homes built of stone or timber, or at least stoutly thatched wattle and daub. Inside, families huddled close, sharing body heat around dwindling hearths. The cold seeped through cracks and keyholes, but companionship and flickering lamplight offered some solace in the encroaching gloom. Hunting wild game helped supplement meager stores. The cries of falcons and hounds echoed across the frozen landscape as nobles and yeomen stalked deer and boar. But winter's bite often killed off prey before it could be captured. Trapping smaller animals like rabbits and squirrels proved a surer, if more tedious, means of procuring food. Fishermen ventured onto frozen jammed rivers and ice-studded seas in search of sustenance. Hauling nets filled with silvery fish required Herculean strength. The risk of breaking through thin, treacherous ice always loomed. Once ashore, they had to contend with fierce winds that threatened to snatch their catch right back into the waves. Winter's icy fingers clutched tight across the land. Frozen ponds and fields transformed into skating rinks and sledding hills, offering respite from the bleak monotony. Children squealed with glee as they glided across the glassy surfaces. Wealthy youths might even don skates of fine steel and leather, while nobles delighted in hare and fox hunts on their ice-jammed moats. Yet the festive merriment did little to dispel the pervasive sense of foreboding. Farmers dreaded the first thaw, which inevitably brought floods that washed away precious topsoil and stunted planting. Then came the long wait for temperatures to drop again, sealing in moisture and nipping destructive weeds in the bud. Through it all, the medieval church offered comfort and guidance. Winter holidays like Christmas, Yule, New Year's, and Candlemas brought welcome distractions. Religious plays and carols echoed through frosty nights, reminding all that, even in deepest winter, salvation drew near. Carols celebrating the Virgin Mary and tales of biblical winter scenes like the Adoration of the Magi sustained hope. The sight of nativity plays acted out by villagers or church-sponsored mummers brought fleeting smiles to haggard faces. Nativity plays depicting the journey of the three wise men traveling through a snowstorm to Bethlehem became particularly popular. As the chill deepened, so did the dread of winter maladies. Coughs and fevers spread easily in crowded homes. The sick took to their beds, racked with chills and burning with fever. Household members nursed them back to health, employing herbal remedies, bloodletting, and prayers for divine intercession. The sick often had recourse to friars, monks, or local wise women skilled in healing arts. They dispensed potions brewed with pungent herbs like rosemary, sage, and thyme. If the patient survived, they were often weaker for weeks, prolonging winter's burden. Amidst sickness and scarcity, death claimed its share of victims. Bodies were laid out on trestle beds, stark figures swathed in wool shrouds. Priests read prayers and sang funeral hymns as mourners filed past, then bore the coffins to nearby churchyards. Graveyards quickly filled with the bodies of infants, the elderly, and those worn down by winter's toll. Grave diggers worked tirelessly, their shovels carving through frozen earth. With each passing day, the fear of plague, pestilence, and other pestilential diseases hung heavy in the air. Medieval people remembered all too well how outbreaks had devastated communities in the recent past. As bodies piled up, rumors spread and terror mounted. For medieval Christians, faith and hope offered solace. They prayed to saints like Saint Roch, known for protecting against plague. Attending church services, bearing flickering candles and holy water, provided momentary distraction and spiritual succor. After a funeral dirge faded away, villagers struggled to rebuild their lives, burying loved ones and trying to forget the icy grip of death that had so nearly claimed them too. Throughout the darkest winter days, a stubborn hope refused to die. People dreamt of spring's eventual return. They recalled how winter had waned and given way to warmer months before, and they knew that sun and soil would work their ancient magic once again. As the solstice passed and daylight crept back, they eagerly awaited the first crocuses pushing through melting snows, the robin's cheerful song echoing through lengthening days. They cherished any hint of renewal, for they understood that winter's relentlessness would someday yield to nature's enduring fertility. For some of us, winter means holidays, snuggles, and snow days. For others, it's a battle for survival. And for our medieval ancestors, the season posed an annual struggle to simply stay alive. Join me as we uncover the secrets behind winter in the Middle Ages and explore what life was really like when the temperatures plummeted and the nights grew long. How did medieval people stay warm? We're used to cozying up next to space heaters or cranking up our thermostats at the first sign of a chill. But in the Middle Ages, staying toasty was an altogether trickier proposition. In the absence of modern heating systems, medieval folks relied on fireplaces fueled by whatever they could scrounge up. Wood was essential, but finding enough dry fuel to keep a fire burning all winter was a challenge. People chopped up fallen branches and limbs from trees that hadn't yet been claimed by their neighbors. Sawmills cut lumber that was delivered to homes and businesses, though these services were expensive. But for those living in the colder northern areas of medieval Europe, wood was usually plentiful since forests dominated the landscape. However, for those living in southern Europe, wood was scarce and thus more valuable. In places like Greece and Italy, people saved scraps of wood from barrels and furniture, which they eventually boiled in vinegar to make vinegar. Alcohol could also be distilled from the vinegar, creating a type of rustic moonshine that helped people endure the long winter nights. Wine played a big role in helping medieval peasants stay warm too. They mixed wine with spices like ginger and cinnamon, herbs like rosemary and thyme, and even vinegar to create a hot drink that was shared among family members. In addition to warding off chills, this concoction also served as a disinfectant and could help prevent deadly diseases. To keep the heat inside, medieval builders employed thick walls made of stone or brick and set up chimneys to vent smoke. For poorer families living in huts made of wood or wattle and daub, a simple clay stove might be their only source of heat. But when supplies ran out, the residents had to move in with relatives or abandon their homes, braving the elements as best they could. Interestingly, in warmer Mediterranean climates, heating wasn't much of a concern. Instead, people concentrated on keeping cool. They slept on flower beds suspended above the ground and used awnings, shutters, and curtains to block the sun. In fact, it was rare for anyone in the Mediterranean to wear more than one garment in the summer. What did medieval people eat in the winter? Today, winter squash and root vegetables like potatoes are a staple of many diets. But during the Middle Ages, people ate mostly what they could grow during the warmer months. This meant that come winter, many Europeans subsisted on dried beans, peas, lentils, milk, cheese, and bread. But the climate and geography of different regions led to unique wintertime meals. For example, wild game like boar and deer were popular in Germany. Meanwhile, fish was a frequent dish in coastal communities. The English relied heavily on dairy products and would often mix cream or milk with beer to add some variety to their diet. Though these staples kept bodies nourished, they didn't always stave off disease. During the winter months, cases of scurvy increased, likely due to a lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. Luckily, citrus fruits like oranges were introduced to Europe in the 12th century. Still, villagers seldom ate them since they were typically reserved for the nobility or used as a decoration. Although times were tough, the winter season also gave people something to look forward to: food. Medieval farmers would store food during the harvest season to ensure they had enough to last through the winter months. Food preservation techniques included drying, salting, smoking, and pickling. Fruits were dried and often made into raisins, while meats were salted or smoked to prevent decay. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots were stored in underground root cellars or pits, and cabbage was braided and hung from rafters. Once winter arrived, families rationed their supplies, making sure they would last until spring. To stretch their food, people devised creative recipes that combined basic ingredients in new ways. Thick soups were made with stale bread, onions, garlic, beans, and milk. Pies were filled with seasonal vegetables, while pancakes were sometimes augmented with the remains of previous meals. No part of an animal went to waste. Offal was used to create sausages, while blood from butchered animals was often boiled and mixed with flour and spices to create a pudding-like substance. Even the bones weren't discarded. They were simmered to extract the gelatin inside, which was then dried and used to supplement the diet. Meat was a rare treat for poor families, but wealthy people enjoyed hunting. Venison and wild boar were considered delicacies. Butchers had special privileges and were permitted to sell meat directly to consumers rather than to middlemen. When push came to shove, the quality of meat could vary widely, and there were even laws against selling adulterated meat. In 1325, the English Parliament passed a statute prohibiting merchants from mixing sawdust or plaster into ground meat. And in 1327, a French king issued a decree against selling rotten meat and forbade butchers from serving rotten meat to members of the royal household. Were medieval people afraid of winter? The harsh weather conditions of winter meant that death was always lurking around the corner. And because medical technology was limited, there wasn't much people could do to combat the dangers of the season. As a result, it's no surprise that superstitions surrounding winter flourished during the Middle Ages. For example, the Romans believed that December was the darkest month of the year, both literally and figuratively. This idea was later incorporated into the celebration of Saturnalia, a week-long festival that honored the Roman god Saturn. During Saturnalia, people exchanged gifts, feasted, and celebrated, but also wore masks and made merry in a manner unbecoming of normal Roman society. Other beliefs held that the months of January and February were inauspicious for starting new projects or making important decisions. Instead, these months were viewed as times for introspection and planning. Many Christians viewed winter as a time for penance and prayer, and monks would often withdraw from society to secluded monasteries to focus on their faith. This practice is similar to the Christian custom of Advent, a period of fasting and spiritual reflection observed in anticipation of Christmas. Even today, some people feel that the darkness and gloom of winter are an appropriate time to think about death and the afterlife. Is this morbid fascination with death what inspired some of the haunting winter-themed works of art created during the Middle Ages? In churches, stained glass windows depicted biblical scenes and stories that taught moral lessons. These images of saints and martyrs reminded worshippers that death was not always tragic, and that the Christian faith could overcome even the coldest of winters. Outside of religion, people found other ways to grapple with the darkness of winter. Bards would travel from town to town, singing tales of heroism and adventure to enthralled listeners. Storytelling and music offered a welcome distraction from the harsh realities of medieval life. By sharing stories of the past, people could forget their troubles for a few hours and imagine themselves transported to different times and places. So, what was life really like during winter in the Middle Ages? Life during the winter months was undeniably difficult, but people adapted and endured. They developed ingenious methods to stay warm and fed themselves and their families, and they found ways to entertain themselves while stuck indoors for weeks at a time. They also confronted the harsh realities of death and dying head-on, finding solace in their faith and each other's company. Winter in the Middle Ages was a test of human resilience and ingenuity, and those who lived through it emerged stronger and more resourceful than ever before. What can we learn from medieval people about dealing with winter today? As we navigate the challenges of winter in our own time, it's helpful to remember the lessons of the past. Here are some ideas to help you embrace the cold weather like a medieval pro. Plan ahead. The medieval people who suffered the most were those who didn't anticipate the coming winter. While you may not need to store food and supplies for months on end, it's wise to be prepared for inclement weather and power outages. Stock up on non-perishable food items, flashlights, and candles, and make sure your heating system is in good repair. Stay warm and cozy. Layer up with warm clothing and blankets, and consider investing in a fireplace or wood stove to keep your home toasty. Don't forget to check up on your friends and neighbors, especially the elderly and young children who are more vulnerable to the cold. Find indoor activities. Just as medieval people turned to storytelling and music for entertainment, there are plenty of ways to keep yourself busy indoors during the winter months. Read books, listen to podcasts, learn a new skill, or catch up with friends and family. Appreciate the beauty of winter. While winter can be challenging, it's also a time of great beauty. The snow-covered landscapes and cozy atmosphere of the season can be truly magical. Embrace the opportunity to slow down, relax, and enjoy the simpler things in life. Be grateful for what you have. Finally, remember that you're not alone in facing the challenges of winter. Reach out to your support system for help, and don't hesitate to ask for assistance if you need it. By following these tips, you can embrace the winter season with the same strength, resourcefulness, and resilience that characterized the medieval people who came before us. And hey, who knows, you might even have a little fun along the way. Now watch. Why is the Middle Ages the deadliest time in history? Or check out survival. The grinding poverty that accompanied medieval life meant many lacked the means to properly shield themselves against the elements. Small, dilapidated hovels struggled to keep the worst of the winter wind at bay, and the constant threat of hypothermia loomed over all. The plight of the poor in the medieval winter is poignantly captured in the paintings of Peter Bruegel the Elder, particularly his iconic 1565 work, The Peasant Wedding. Depicting a rustic celebration, the artist's keen eye spares no detail, including an assortment of peasant couples huddling closely together for warmth, seeking solace in each other's embrace against the backdrop of a bleak, cheerless winter landscape. Such scenes were not uncommon in the 5th, 10th, and 16th centuries when pestilence, famine, and war had ravaged Europe, leaving many exposed to the cruel mercy of the winter months. Bruegel's stark imagery serves as a reminder of just how harsh and unforgiving winter could be in the medieval world. But it wasn't just the cold that posed a threat. Winter also brought storms of unparalleled fury that could devastate communities in an instant. High winds laden with rain and sleet lashed across the countryside, tearing off roofs and sending chills that penetrated even the warmest homes. Snowdrifts piled high, blocking pathways and burying entire villages under pristine but treacherous mounds. Transport and trade ground to a halt, further isolating rural dwellers and exposing them to the full force of winter's wrath. Castles, too, felt the impact of these violent winter storms, though their sturdier construction ensured they stood defiant against the elements. Medieval architecture, with its thick stone walls and sturdy foundations, was designed to withstand nature's harshest blows. Yet even the most formidable fortresses suffered the effects of winter's capricious temper. Accounts from the 13th century siege of Rochester Castle vividly describe how heavy rains turned the surrounding countryside into a quagmire, hindering the English forces' ability to mount effective attacks. Meanwhile, within the castle walls, residents faced their own challenges, as water seeped through cracks and crevices, seeping into chambers and dampening supplies. Foodstuffs, livestock, and firewood were carefully stockpiled in anticipation of winter, but the prolonged siege threatened to deplete their reserves long before spring's return. As the storms raged on, tension mounted within the castle. Residents hunkered down in the face of the tempest, their fates hanging in the balance as they waited for the siege to end. The passage of time blurred into a monotonous cycle of wind and rain. Each gust seemed to mock their confinement, each downpour a reminder of their precarious situation. Days turned into weeks, the relentless storms testing the limits of their endurance. Yet through it all, the spirit of resilience shone. Despite the daunting odds, inhabitants of medieval castles and villages alike refused to surrender to the relentless assaults of winter. Drawing upon a deep well of resourcefulness, They made the most of limited provisions and adapted to life in the shadow of the storm. Games and pastimes were devised to stave off boredom. Tailies were shared to lift sagging spirits. And acts of charity and camaraderie flourished as neighbors banded together to help the most vulnerable weather the harsh season. Even in the midst of winter's fury, the human spirit persevered, demonstrating a capacity for endurance and ingenuity that transcended the harshest of climates. For medieval villagers and castle inhabitants, the storms of winter weren't just natural phenomena. They were formidable opponents that demanded respect and tenacity. To confront this adversary head-on, they developed an array of ingenious strategies to protect themselves against the elements. Houses were reinforced with extra shutters and locks. Roofs were repaired and livestock were sheltered in barns. Wine and ale were served warm to raise spirits and bolster body heat. Communities organized to clear pathways through snowdrifts, ensuring vital routes remained accessible. And when the winds reached their peak, the countryside fell silent as villagers retreated indoors, sealing themselves inside until the storm abated. Within the confines of home, life continued. Hearths were stoked, ovens were heated, and families huddled together for warmth and companionship. Though winter's wrath raged outside, life went on within the shelter of medieval walls. The ferocity of winter storms in the medieval period can be attributed to several factors that combine to create a volatile mix of climatic conditions. First and foremost, the absence of modern meteorological monitoring and recording. Systems meant that gauging the severity of storms was largely a matter of anecdotal accounts, leaving us with a fragmented understanding of the actual forces that lashed across Europe and the Middle East. What we do know comes from written records, literary works, and the artistic depictions of the era, all of which offer glimpses into the turbulence of medieval winters. Another contributing factor was the lack of sophisticated navigation and communication tools. Without reliable methods for accurately charting one's course at sea, ships often found themselves buffeted by sudden and unexpected gales, which could transform placid waterways into raging torrents. Similarly, the absence of comprehensive road networks meant that travelers were ill-equipped to navigate treacherous mountain passes or sudden blizzards that could bury pathways and disorient those who dared venture out. This isolation compounded the challenges of coping with winter storms. Without swift and dependable means of communication, isolated communities were often caught off guard, left to face the brunt of winter's fury without warning or assistance. Finally, the absence of early warning systems meant that people had little time to prepare for the worst of winter's wrath. Without advanced forecasting or tracking mechanisms, sudden blizzards, floods, or extreme cold could descend with little to no notice, leaving medieval populations scrambling for shelter as the first flakes fell or the floodwaters rose. These factors combined to create a perilous environment during winter months, underscoring the importance of community, resourcefulness, and a bit of luck in surviving the season. Life in the medieval winter was a test of endurance, a battle against the elements that demanded the utmost from those who lived through it. While it may seem easy to romanticize the hardships of the past, the reality of medieval winters offers a sobering reminder of the challenges our ancestors faced. Their struggles not only shaped our history, but also serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Today, as we gather around warm hearths and enjoy the comforts of modern conveniences, let us spare a thought for those who brave the elements in the darkest depths of winter. Let their fortitude inspire us to face our own challenges with courage, adaptability, and a sense of community. May we find strength in knowing that we are part of a lineage that has endured through the harshest of winters and emerged not just surviving, but thriving. After all, as the old saying goes, winter is the time for comfort, good cheer, and a roaring fire. A sentiment that resonates as powerfully today as it did in the heart of the medieval age. Hovels boasted precious little in the way of creature comforts. Mager rations of peat or wood, scavenged from the forest, barely fed the sputtering hearth. Families crammed together in squalid quarters, sharing body heat and breathing air thick with smoke and the fetid stench of unwashed humanity. It was a bleak existence, to be sure. Year after pitiless year, they endured winter's cruelties with a stoicism born of necessity. Their strength of spirit and unbreakable bonds of community were the secret of their survival. In the face of unimaginable hardship, they found pockets of hope and moments of shared humanity. So the next time we grumble about the inconvenience of a delayed flight or the indignity of slushy streets, let us pause and reflect. Our modern winter woes are but a shadow of what once was. In the tapestry of human history, the icy trials of the Middle Ages loom large. They serve as a reminder of our species' remarkable resilience and the preciousness of a warm hearth and a full belly. As we drift off to slumber, let us spare a thought for those who came before. In our dreams, perhaps we will catch a glimpse of their world, a harsher, crueler world than our own, and yet one in which the indomitable human spirit shone all the brighter for the darkness that surrounded it. Good night and sweet dreams of gentle spring breezes to come. And yet, even in the face of such privations, there were moments of cheer to be found. A hush so profound that even the birds had sought refuge against the biting wind, leaving the silence unbroken save for the mournful whistle of the breeze. Through the bare branches of trees, stark silhouettes against the leaden sky, the wind moaned its ceaseless dirge. Its icy fingers seemed to reach deep into the very marrow of one's bones, stilling the warmth and leaving behind only the gnawing chill of fear. Daylight hours were short and gloomy, offering little respite from the oppressive gloom that pressed in on all sides. As twilight fell early, the world grew dark and dangerous. Shadows deepened, taking on monstrous shapes that lurked just beyond the feeble range of flickering torches and fading oil lamp. Firelight flickered within the close confines of each homestead, the only defense against the encroaching darkness and the biting cold. Within these fragile sanctuaries, families huddled close, seeking solace in the shared body heat, the warmth of words and the stories whispered to chase away the creeping dread of winter's endless night. For within this season of frozen wastelands and frosted breath lay dangers both seen and unseen. Sickness stalked the frozen wastelands, a ghostly specter that claimed its victims with a cough, a fever, a wasting away that left empty eyes staring sightlessly at the heavens. Death, too, made his home in winter's frozen heart, claiming all in his glacial embrace, young, old, high and low. None were safe from his icy touch. Hunger, too, tightened his icy grip on the land. Fields lay barren under the snow, their bounty hidden from view. The meager stores of dried meat and grain dwindled with each passing day, offering little sustenance against the unending chill. Desperation drove men to desperate measures, forcing them to traverse the frozen wastes in search of sustenance. But the road was perilous, fraught with hidden pitfalls of ice and snow. A false step could mean certain doom, swallowed up forever in the merciless white wilderness. All that remained was the silent wind, whistling its mournful tune through the stark branches overhead. The only movement in this monochrome world was the swirling snow, dancing in frenzied patterns, an eerie ballet to the grim music of winter's lament. The glow of communal fires in the village square drew folks out of their hovels, if only for a short respite. Gathered around the leaping flames, neighbors exchanged jests and jibes, stories and songs. For a fleeting time, the cruel realities of winter seemed distant indeed. Young lovers stole secret kisses, their ardor undimmed by the cold. Children shrieked with delight as they scampered and slid across frozen ponds. Even the elderly felt the weight of their years lift for a spell, transported back to the carefree winters of their youth. Such interludes of merriment were all the more precious for their rarity. Winter's onslaught was relentless and unforgiving. Thoughts soon turned to empty bellies and the gnawing hunger that was the constant companion of the poor. Dreams of spring's bounty seemed a cruel mockery as fields lay barren beneath a blanket of snow. The specter of famine loomed large in these lean times. A failed harvest could spell doom for entire villages. Many a mother watched in anguish as her child's cheeks grew gaunt and their eyes dulled with the hollow stare of starvation. The cruel calculus of scarcity bred a special kind of desperation. Tales abounded of the depraved lengths to which some would go to fill their bellies, unnatural acts that haunted the nightmares of pious folk. And hunger was not the only scourge to stalk the land. Winter's chill breath bred a host of maladies that preyed upon the weakened populace. The hacking cough of pneumonia echoed through many a hovel, as loved ones looked on helplessly. The pox and flux raged unchecked, decimating entire families. The very old and very young were especially vulnerable, their frail bodies ill-equipped to weather winter's ravages. But perhaps the greatest cruelty was reserved for those forced to venture out into the teeth of winter's fury. Travelers risked life and limb on treacherous, ice-lit roads. Many a hapless wayfarer met their doom, swallowed up by swirling blizzards or plummeting into deep snowdrifts. Their frozen corpses would not be discovered until the spring thaw, a grim reminder of winter's lethal power. Even the valiant knights, those stout warriors of the realm, were not immune to winter's depredations. Clad in their heavy armor, they made easy prey for the bone-chilling cold that crept into every joint and rivet. Numb hands, made clumsy by frozen gauntlets, fumbled with sword and shield. Once mighty charges floundered in the deep snowdrifts as icicles formed on their heaving flanks. Great and small alike cursed the name of winter. In the halls of power, the crown weighed heavy on royal brows, furrowed with care. For even a monarch could not decree the seasons to reverse their inexorable turn. The cost of keeping the court supplied with provisions and firewood was staggering. Royal treasuries groaned beneath the strain as grasping merchants reaped handsome profits from the king's largesse. But for all the miseries it engendered, winter's reign was not eternal. Even in the depths of icy despair, folk clung to the promise of spring's sweet renewal. The joyous feast of Stephen offered a welcome reprieve from winter's woes. For one raucous day, the world turned upside down as a lowly peasant assumed the mantle of the lord of misrule. Drunken revelry and bawdy songs lifted spirits and lightened hearts. Laughter, that balm for the careworn soul, echoed through the frostbitten land. In the fullness of time, winter's gelled grip began to loosen. Icicles dripped from the eaves as the sun worked its subtle magic. Snowdrops and crocuses pushed their way through the softening earth, delicate harbingers of winter's retreat. The land stirred with new life, shaking off the torpid slumber of the frozen months. Hearts lifted and voices raised in joyful celebration. The Feast of the Plough marked the triumphant return of spring's verdant splendor. Sleek oxen dragged gleaming plowshares through rich, dark earth as the cycle of planting and renewal began anew. The lean times of winter soon faded into memory as fields rippled with the green and golden bounty of the land. Looking back across the centuries, we marvel at the fortitude of our medieval forebears. The snows of winter had fallen thick and fast over the land, blanketing all in a pristine white hush. So how exactly do people go about surviving the long winter months? What did their days look like when snow fell and the ground froze solid? Upon the populace a knowledge that the only way out was through. One cannot help but feel a swell of admiration for the fortitude of our medieval forebears, who faced each bitter winter as an indomitable foe and emerged year after year to greet the spring on the other side. In our modern world of central heating and on-demand grocery deliveries, it can be easy to forget the hardships they faced as a matter of course. But as we drift off to sleep in our warm beds, perhaps we can spare a thought for those huddled medieval masses and marvel at the strength that carried them through winter after winter, waiting for the light's return. In a world so often cold and dark, such enduring hope and resilience is a fire that cannot be quenched, burning on from their distant hovels to our own night-swaddled rooms. May we keep that flame alive in our hearts, come what winter may. When the temperatures plummeted and snow piled high, medieval villagers retreated indoors and battened down the hatches for the long haul. One such beacon of hope was the feast of St. Stephen, celebrated each year on December 26, though the origins of this midwinter celebration are somewhat obscure. By the Middle Ages, it had become a cherished tradition across much of Europe. After the solemn religious observances of Christmas Day, St. Stephen's Day was a time for merrymaking, feasting, and the playful reversal of normal social roles. Central to the festivities was the custom of misrule, where a peasant or commoner would be appointed lord of misrule for the day and granted the power to command their social superiors. This light-hearted upending of the status quo provided a much-needed release valve for the rigid class tensions that normally dominated medieval life. The Lord of Misrule presided over a topsy-turvy day of revelry, leading raucous processions through the streets, initiating mischievous pranks, and decreeing that everyone from lords to laborers should make merry together. Professional entertainers like minstrels, jugglers, and jesters would ply their trades, while games of chance and skill kept the crowds amused. Body comedic sketches called mummers' plays were performed, reenacting tales from legend and folklore in broad, exaggerated strokes. Mock jousts and farcical court proceedings induced peals of laughter, a welcome respite from the grim realities of winter life. Of course, no medieval celebration was complete without a hearty feast. On St. Stephen's Day, the Lord of Misrule could insist that the wealthy provide food and drink for the whole community, a charitable gesture that fostered goodwill and fellowship among all. Roasted meats were the centerpiece of the feast. From geese and capons to the traditional roast boar's head, marched in with great fanfare. Minced meat pies, heavy with dried fruit and spices, offered a sweet treat, while the wassail bowl flowed freely, the warm spiced cider bolstering everyone's spirits. One can almost hear the laughter and lively chatter ringing through the halls, rising above the blustery winter winds outside. For one brief shining day, the hardships of winter faded into the background as the community came together in a spirit of joy and camaraderie. As the feast concluded and the revelers dispersed back to their hearths, they carried the warmth of the festivities with them, like a flicker of cheery firelight in the dark. The knowledge that they had friends and neighbors to rely on, that they could find moments of laughter and levity even in the bleakest of times, surely helped buoy their spirits for the hard days still ahead. And somehow the winter's icy grip seemed a bit less merciless when shared with others. Windows were boarded up to keep out the drafts, and fires were banked low to conserve precious fuel supplies. Family members shared meager rations of salted meats, cheeses, and breads, stretching their provisions as far as possible. In the evenings, people huddled close to their hearths, seeking warmth and comfort in the flickering flames. Game of dice or cards might have been played by the lamplight to pass the time, accompanied by the murmur of tales and ballads recounted to while away the hours. Outside, the wind might have shrieked and the snow might have swirled, but within the sturdy stone or timber-bird walls of homes and taverns, there existed a universe unto itself. In the dim oil lamp glow, people found solace in the simple pleasures of companionship, conversation, and modest diversions. They clung to each other for support, sharing stories and laughter as the icy darkness pressed against the fragile barriers that separated them from the elements. Within those four walls, they constructed an island of warmth and human connection in a frozen and unforgiving sea. Each hearth became a sanctuary of sorts, a refuge where the chill of winter could not penetrate the bonds of family and community. Even the sparsest fare eaten by the fire tasted like a feast compared to the barren landscape beyond. and the simple routine of tending the flames chased away the encroaching loneliness that threatened to engulf one in the frozen wasteland outside. As the nights grew longer and the days colder, people sought refuge in the cozy confines of home. There, wrapped in the comforting glow of hearth, they found strength and solace in shared humanity. The absence of sunlight and the biting frost might have chilled their bones, but within those small, sturdy dwellings, the human spirit glowed warmly and defiantly. Stores of grains and salted meats were checked and rechecked, every scrap of wood and kindling jealously hoarded, and heavy wool garments donned in stoic anticipation. The only spark of levity and hope in the whole bleak affair came with the Christmas festivities surrounding the feast of Saint Stephen on December 26th. For a few merry days, the normal social order was gleefully appended as a lord of misrule was appointed from among the peasantry to preside over a bawdy array of feasts, dances, games, and general mischief. With bellies full of ale and wine, faces flushed from the press of bodies and the exertions of revelry, the common folk could for a brief, shining moment forget the long privations of winter and revel in the joys of life and community. One can imagine the scenes of boisterous celebration erupting in halls and public squares across the land, the raucous laughter, the wheezing of reed pipes and fiddles as the people capered about in a whirling kaleidoscope of color and mirth. For once, serf and nobleman mingled freely, the usual lines of class and station erased in the spirit of goodwill and fellowship. The lord of misrule, perhaps a puffed-up young peasant lad with stars in his eyes, issued grandiose proclamations and ridiculous decrees to the delight of all. It must have been a heady thing, that burst of misrule and saturnalia amid the bleakness. But as with all things, the festive season was but a temporary respite, the eye of the storm. As the Yule log burned down to embers and the last wassail bowl was drained, the people drifted back to their hearths, and the aching cold darkness once more descended. The gaiety of Saint Stephen Estee and the Lord of Misrule's brief shining reign were replaced again by the grim business of survival as winter tightened its grip. For the next interminable stretch of months, time seemed to slow to a frigid crawl. With the land frozen and unworkable, there was little for the rural peasantry to do but hunker down and pray for deliverance. The shortening days and lengthening nights yawned like a vast chasm from which there was no escape. Huddled together in their crude shelters against the killing cold, they must have despaired of ever again feeling the kiss of spring's warm breath upon their faces. But even the cruelest winter cannot last forever, and indeed, the first greening shoots of new life were already straining up beneath the frozen ground, biding their time. For those who endured, who clung to hope and to each other through the darkest days and coldest nights, the thaw would come again. The sun would return to the sky, the blood quicken in the veins, the world slowly shed its grays and whites for a burgeoning riot of color. On Plough Monday, just after Epiphany, the land could again be tilled, and the great wheel of the agricultural year would creak back into motion. The people would emerge blinking into the pale but gathering light of spring leaner and deeply tired, but alive and glad of it. Fields would be furrowed, seeds planted, flocks driven out to graze on new grass, and the whole merry dance of life would begin anew. But that was yet to come. For now, the cruel heart of winter beat on, and the people of the Middle Ages steeled themselves once more to weather its icy reign. They drew what comfort they could from their rough wool cloaks, their smoky hovels, their scant stores of food so diligently laid by, but most of all, from each other. In a world so beset by hardship and peril, where the very seasons seemed intent on crushing the life from their bones, they endured as they always had together. Lords and peasants, young and old, shivering and hoping beneath the same lean winter sky, waiting for the spring that must someday come. And so they hunkered down in the darkness and the cold, listening to the mournful howl of the wind and the groaning of the ice. spinning what tales and weaving what dreams they could to while away the long winter nights. Perhaps they imagined a future where the winters were kinder, the hearths warmer, the bellies fuller, a world their shivering hands and frozen bones might build for the generations to come. Or perhaps they simply held fast to what scraps of light and hoped they could muster in the moment, knowing that even the longest winter must someday yield to spring. What did they eat? How did they pass the time? Historians have pieced together a fairly comprehensive picture of how the medieval peasantry endured the seasonal scourge. We know they took drastic measures to shield themselves and their families from the elements, adopting layers of clothing, sheltering in place, and carefully rationing dwindling food supplies. But aside these practicalities, what was everyday life like under a blanket of snow? What did people think about, talk about, hope for, or fear as winter's icy fingers tightened their grip? Through an examination of medieval records, literature, and art, historians have gleaned some fascinating insights into the psychology and culture surrounding the winter season. These glimpses into medieval minds offer a unique perspective on how ordinary people coped with the emotional toll of winter as much as its physical challenges. Here are some ways people experienced winter in the Middle Ages. They hunkered down in their homes and hoped for the best. In the face of such brutal conditions, the strength of the human spirit to endure and keep faith in brighter days ahead is truly a marvel. Let us tip our hats to those long ago lords and peasants who suffered much and yet endured still more. As the long winter months dragged on, medieval folk looked forward to any opportunity to lift their spirits and foster a sense of community and goodwill amidst the hardships. For many of us, the depth of winter is a time to stay snuggled up inside, to seek solace in the comfort and glow of hearth fires, thick quilts, and mugs of hot cocoa. For our medieval ancestors, though, winter nights were a different story altogether. The harsh howling winds that rattled their wattle and daub homes carried a constant threat of death, not only from exposure but from famine and disease as well. Winter was a time of scarcity when the natural world withdrew into a death-like slumber, leaving those who tended to the rhythms of the land to face a bleak and uncertain season. The freezing temperatures brought everything to a standstill, forcing medieval peasants to adapt and endure. They toiled throughout the autumn months to gather enough supplies to sustain themselves until the return of spring. Food, mainly in the form of dried grains, roots, fruit, and salted or smoked meats, was carefully rationed to stretch as far as possible. Homes were sealed up tight against the elements, and fires banked down to reduce smoke and heat loss. Families huddled together for warmth, seeking refuge in the numbers for comfort and companionship. All through the long night, they told stories, sang songs, and prayed to pass the time and ward off the encroaching darkness. If there was enough fuel, they might enjoy the flickering light of a hearth fire, although tending that flame constantly was a necessity to keep alive through the long, cold hours. The youngest and most vulnerable members of the household, along with the elderly, were at greatest risk during winter. Babies and small children needed constant care and nourishment to keep them healthy, while the aged, ill, or injured required extra attention and support to survive the harshest season. Extended family networks and close-knit communities offered crucial assistance, sharing resources and ensuring no one faced the winter alone. But even with these supports, the cold, dark nights posed constant peril, especially when daylight dwindled to mere hours. A bitter wind clawing through cracks in the walls, or a carelessly overturned hearth could spell disaster. Children whimpered, drawing their cloaks tighter as the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped. Yet somehow, even in the depths of winter, life still found a way to persist. 14th century England saw the emergence of a culture of carols, a tradition that continues to warm hearts 5 centuries later. These musical performances, featuring a group of singers, going door to door in the weeks before Christmas, brought much-needed merriment and spiritual reflection to medieval homes. They also served an important purpose, raising funds and gathering provisions for the poor and needy as winter's grip tightened. People looked for ways to alleviate the hardships of the season and found solace in fellowship and faith. Although rations were meager, a kettle of thin soup shared among villagers was a source of sustenance and camaraderie. Places of worship offered shelter, hot drinks, and charity for those who had nowhere else to turn. Churches rang their bells, summoning the desperate to come in from the cold for a brief respite. Inside the towering stone structures, flickering candlelight danced across worn pews, and the murmur of prayers mingled with the crackle of the hearth. For a precious few moments, the biting wind outside ceased to hold such icy sway. The doors marked an entrance not only into God's house, but also a portal to warmth, kindness, and perhaps a hot bowl of broth. If you enjoyed learning about life in medieval Europe, be sure to check out the series in the description below. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more immersive historical tales. Now, as the winter night deepens, I invite you to imagine yourself transported back to that time and place. You stand in a medieval village square, wrapped tightly against the cold. Snow crunches beneath your feet, and the wind whispers tales of hardship and hope. What do you see, hear, and feel in this timeless moment? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's build a community of learners and storytellers together. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, may your days be filled with warmth and wonder, and may the spirits of the season fill your heart with peace.